Greetings from Public Health Dayton in Montgomery County. My name is Fabrice Juin, and I am the project manager for the local office on minority health. Thank you for joining us for this evening's virtual webinar. We have a very insightful engagement ahead of us, so please do not hesitate to share this event to some last minute invites to anyone you know who would be interested, whether that be a student, educator that you are close to, or even pop or auntie, whoever you want to send it over to. Make sure that they are hopping on. We have a lot of great information to squeeze into the next 60 minutes, so let's jump right in. Tonight, the local office on minority health presents At What Cost? The health impact experienced by Black students pursuing educational attainment. This is a virtual event put together to commemorate Black History Month 2022 and its theme of Black health and wellness. We'll spend some time exploring education access and quality as a social determinant of health and the unique experience of Black and African American students in navigating higher education, in addition to hearing from some very special panelists. Before we get going, I have to give y'all this shameless plug about the program that made this possible. So next slide, please. So the local office on minority health is a program partially funded by the Ohio Commission on Minority Health, but also by the Human Services Levy here in Montgomery County. It is a very self-explanatory program, but is essentially dedicated to all things related to minority health, whether that be monitoring the health status of minoritized communities, informing and educating and empowering people, mobilizing community partnerships and actions, or putting together sustainable and innovative ways to support local health efforts. We are not the only local office on minority health in Ohio. There are offices in Akron, Cleveland, Columbus, Toledo, and Youngstown, but you got the best one over. You got the Dayton local office, so really you don't need to go anywhere else. But if you are from some of these areas, feel free to check them out and check out some of the great work that they do. Next slide, please. So next I want to introduce our student panelists. We have Clara Joseph joining us, who is a medical student at the Wright State University, Boonshoft School of Medicine, class of 2024. And then we also have India Richardson, who is a nursing student at the University of Dayton, class of 2023. This is far from the first time that these ladies have engaged in important topics and issues like this one, as they are both heavily involved in their campus communities as dynamic leaders. So thank you both for joining us. Next slide, please. Next, we have our featured guest speaker, Dr. Antar Tichavakunda. Dr. Tichavakunda received his PhD in urban education policy from the University of Southern California. Currently, he is an assistant professor of education at the University of Cincinnati. Born and raised in Washington, D.C., Tichavakunda is a product of D.C. public schools and earned a Bachelor of Arts from Brown University. Prior to his doctoral studies, Tichavakunda worked as an 11th grade English teacher at DC Public Schools. Using a qualitative inquiry, Dr. Tichavakunda has engaged in research on college readiness, Black students' experiences at predominantly white institutions, and more broadly, the sociology of race in higher education. His published work can be found in urban education, educational policy, race, ethnicity, and education, the review of higher education, and educational studies. His first book, Black Campus Life, The World's Black Students Make at a Historically White Institution, is published with the SUNY Press, which is the State University of New York Press. Thank you all for participating in what I know is going to be a very informative panel discussion. I'm going to stop there and hand the screen sharing privileges over to Dr. Tichavakunda as he takes us on a journey through his debut book. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you for the introduction. Hopefully you all can hear me. Hopefully you all can see that. Can my panelists see that? Cool. Lovely. All right. So I'm going to make sure that I am not speaking more than 25 minutes to make sure that we have airtime for everyone. I really want to hear from the student panelists as well about, at what costs, right? When thinking about navigating these educational spaces. And already you can see me veering off track. So let me get back to it. I say, my name is Antar Tichavakunda, pronouns he, him. As Fabrice was talking and giving my biography, I was like, I probably don't need to give another biography. So I deleted that slide for you all. I tweet very often. If you all are on Twitter, you can follow me. It's just my last name. I tend to tweet about education, sometimes about race, most often about anime. So as a scholar, right, I think about you have to have a research agenda. You heard that I studied the sociology of race and higher education. Within that large, broad topic, I'm focusing on different questions. The question I'm really interested in right now is how can we better understand and support Black students and communities in a society where racism is permanent? So, if you've heard a little bit about critical race theory, actual critical race theory, you can see how critical race theory shapes my research agenda. And that's the latter part of this question. In a society where racism is permanent, that's actually a thesis from critical race thought from Derek Bell. So I'm really informed by critical race thought when I, even in how I engage with my research. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my book, which kind of gets at this central research question. So, to yourselves, right, I want you to think when you think of Black student life at predominantly white institutions, what comes to mind, right? Just take a second and think. What comes to mind? You can think about the media, think about Inside Higher Ed, Chronicle, what the Inquirer, whatever media outlets you're using, your school newspaper. Think about what's online, what's on Twitter. Think about research. When you think about Black student life at PWIs, what comes to mind? Do you think about TV shows? So if you ask me, I think about certain things. Like, so this instance right here, look at this picture, right? In a similar talk, I asked people, what do you think's happening here? And many people were like, oh, it seems like it's a protest, right? Like Black students protesting. This is actually the forced ending of a Black party, right? Just during graduation weekend at USC, they called in all of these LAPD officers, helicopters in the sky, just to stop Black people from partying and celebrating graduation. Right across the street was another party that was not stopped by LAPD, and it had predominantly, you guessed it, white partygoers, right? So when I think about Black student life at PWIs, I tend to think about the policing, the carcerality surrounding Black student life. I think about the anti-Black racism directed towards Black people when Black people aren't even around, right? So here you have this is some fraternity member from a historically white fraternity, a Panhellenic fraternity, and here he is chanting some little ditty about with the N-word, right? So I think about anti-Black racism. I think about with the sickening regularity that we hear on the news, that we see in like newspapers, right, online periodicals about college students, non-Black college students saying the N-word, non-Black faculty members saying the N-word. It happens with a sickening regularity. And I also think about resistance. I think about protest movements. Here you have the concerned student movement, 1950 at Mizzou, right? So I think about how, at the end of the day, Black people aren't taking this poor racial climate, poor race relations, just lying down. There's there's activist orientation. There's resistance to all of this. And in so many words, I think about this text. This is a very important book called The Agony of Education. And in this book, it came out in the 90s, the authors are showing that, like, hey, we have these predominantly white institutions. We think that they're, we have to really kind of check our assumptions here because not everyone is having an equitable experience. So these authors did a really useful study showing that, yeah, not only do Black students have a differential experience, it's oftentimes, in a word, agonizing. So that feels to me like the tenor of research on Black student life at PWIs. But in my work, I think about my experience at a PWI, right? I went to Brown University. I could tell you a lot about the racism that I actually did encounter and experience, but the first thing that I'll tell you wouldn't be about that. It would be about the life that we made in spite of or because of the racial climate. So it'd be something like this picture right here. That's me in the Providence hoodie, right? I mean, I love hoodies apparently. I just crossed Alpha Phi Alpha, so everything I was wearing was black and gold, even this Providence sweater. It was very obnoxious. But I'm on my BlackBerry. I'm dating myself here, and I'm BBMing people to come to Harambe House. Harambe was the Black Residence Hall, and we were having like this kind of just loosely organized freestyle battle, and people from other residence halls were coming in, people from other schools were coming in. It was just a beautiful moment of Black congregation, Black joy, right? So I think about these moments. I think it's important to talk about both things. It's important to talk about the agony of education for Black students, but it's also important to talk about the life that Black students make despite that agony as well. So I think it's a both and. So to my book, right? That gives you a little bit more background about how I approach research. So you'll see some of this in when I describe the book that we heard about, Black Campus Life. So I pretty much followed these students around at a historically white institution. It was a selective school. I call it West Side University. And that's it's a pseudonym just to protect student identities. And yeah, Caldwell School of Engineering again. That's a pseudonym. And I was just following around Black engineering students, undergraduate students. The population of the Black students within the engineering school was actually only 2%. So a very marginal Black population. But what's interesting is if you think about the engineering school in general, it was a majority non-white student population. So you might assume, well, if it's not majority white, are these Black students just, are they good, right? And what I found was that was not the case. Black students still had to deal with anti-Black racism, even from non-white people of color, right? Non-Black people of color. So that's a little bit about the context. And what I did was an ethnography. Some of you may be asking, what's an ethnography? That's a fancy word of saying, like, I really tried to understand the culture of a group, or the culture of like an institution. But in this case, I was really curious about understanding the culture of what it meant to be a Black engineering student at this historically white institution that I call Westside University. So what did this actually look like? I was in the archives. I went through over 60 years of issues of the West Side magazine. In this magazine, there was a section that was focused just on on the engineering school. So that kind of gave me more historical context about Black life or race relations and the engineering school. I think about access, right? How was I able to follow Black engineering students around? I couldn't just pop up to a National Society of Black Engineers meeting. I couldn't just pop up and be like, all right, y'all, I'm here, you know? I had to ask for permission, right? I needed access. So I presented my topic of what I wanted to do, you know, following Black engineers around. And I got permission from the executive board of the NSBE chapter, National Society of Blacks Engineering, at this school. And I actually became a dues paying member of this NSBE chapter, which they really wanted because it makes them look better. So you can just imagine me, like I was like, what, 26 at the time, talking to these students, and they're like, yeah, but did you pay your dues though? You know, like it was like, okay, I got y'all. I'll pay my dues. Um, and also, it was a lot of interviews. I did over 100 interviews, mainly with undergraduate students, 9 Black graduate students, and also faculty and staff. I also interviewed nearly 80% of the Black undergraduate engineering population at Caldwell. Now, some of you might see this and be like, oh, okay, he's flexing 80%. We get it. We get it, Antar. It's a both and though. This is more of an indictment of the university because I only interviewed about 40 some Black students, right? How is 40 Black students 80% of the engineering population? That's an indictment of the school, right? So I say that to kind of show, yes, I got like a diversity of opinions within this Black engineering community, but yes, this shows how marginal the Black population is. And also did participant observation, meaning I just hung out with a lot of these students. I shadowed them. I went to class with them. I studied with them. I even partied with them. And I write about this in the book. There's a like a little section called like Brown Sugar, where I went to this party that the Black engineers had that was called Brown Sugar. And I thought it was fun just because how often in like research or education research do you read about like Black students just partying, having fun, right? So definitely an experience for me. But yeah, I went to a lot of NSBE meetings and events. Um, as much as probably the executive board members, they called me the honorary executive. I mean, an honorary NSBE member. Like I said, I was a dues paying member. I even did tie breaking votes sometimes, you know, which I felt weird about, but I was like, all right, I guess I got y'all, you know. And just so you all know that I was actually part of the culture, they called me NSBE Dad. And you know, it's like, okay, yeah, that's cute, that's close. I was a little offended though, because I was like, remember, I'm 26. I'm only 8 years older than the youngest person here. Like, come on, like the math isn't mathing. Like, I know my hairline isn't as strong as it used to be, but NSBE Dad was a little, yeah, it was a little hurtful. But I did do a little like chauffeuring. I was like the soccer dad, taking them to different places too, because I wanted to, you know, just show my reciprocity and being thankful that they lent me their stories. So I want to say a little bit about the history of West Side Engineering. This isn't in the book. Like I talk about it, but I want to be able to show you it, right? So these institutions have histories, and these histories shape their present cultures, right? So that's why I was in the archives to begin with. So this is actually the first reference to Black people in the West Side Engineering section. And The first sentence is, the scene is dark as Africa, but Africa is lightening. So I just want you to think about that, right? How are Black people structured in relationship to engineering? They aren't really, like, okay, these Black people, they're bare backs, no shirts, and they're seen as almost like just manual laborers, right? As opposed to creators, as opposed to makers, right? So this is just because it kind of lets you know the history of race in relation to engineering, even at this institution. And this is a quote from the Caldwell Dean, who said, "We simply don't have, across the nation as a whole, more than the tiniest trickle of Negroes and Latin Americans coming into engineering schools. And this has been true for a very long time." Now, wherever you are, whatever your position is, right, whatever school you're at, if you're at a school, I want you to think about how people talk about pipeline issues. This dean, the dean of this engineering school, was saying this in 1968. You could pretty much transfer this to almost any other profession, public health, medicine, whatever. There's always going to be some dean, some leader saying, oh, there just aren't enough qualified people, right? And I'm here to tell you that's BS. So Westside University in 1968 had 0 Black engineering students, but Black engineering students were graduating from pretty much the same 6 HBCUs at the same time. So I'm not an engineer, but I can put 2 and 2 together, right? The math just isn't mathing there. So what I want you to take from this is that Black students and other people of color have always been interested in tech, engineering, and STEM. The problem, however, is that schools and universities have not always supported these groups. And the same goes for whatever you're into, right? Whether it's nursing, medicine, what have you. It's more of an issue of institutional will than anything else. So when it comes to matters of joy, spaces, Black places and spaces, I always want you to think about, okay, what is the institution doing to get in the way of Black students or help Black students? So I want to talk now about the strain of navigating campus, right? Not talking about history anymore, actually, getting to what I saw when I was following students. So I want to highlight one student in particular right now. His name was pseudonym Johnson. And I'll read this. This is from my book. During a walk between classes, Johnson, feeling particularly frustrated with his grades, said, "If I could do it all over, I wouldn't have come here. I feel like I spend so much time adapting, keeping up with the Joneses that it hurts. I'm tired of trying to play the game," Johnson said with a sigh. Thinking about his experience at Westside University, he expressed that if he went to a school that matched his culture, he would have fared better academically. Now, Johnson is Caribbean American. We're still really good friends from New York. Went to a predominantly Black and Latinx high school, surrounded by Black people, in New York, the Bronx specifically. And he went to this, very elitist, majority white school. So he felt like it just didn't match his culture. And he spent so much time just trying to adapt that it hurts, right? So once you think about that, it hurt. The physiological, like, kind of words that he's using right there. Now, what's going on here? Some of you may not know what this guy's doing. He's doing a dance, right? A dance called the Millie Rock. And it makes sense. I'm promised I'm gonna bring it together. I'm bringing it together because we gotta talk about the agony, but we also gotta talk about the joy, those life-giving moments, right? I said before we got on the call that I'm dressed like a youth preacher, so that's what I'm doing right now, right? I'm preaching. I'm just kidding. So again, that's Johnson. This is Johnson telling me more about his experience. I actually saw this scene during finals time. This school gave it's like the midnight brunch. So they open up cafeterias at midnight for students to come in and enjoy a meal, right? And that's for the entire university. But Black students use this midnight brunch as a Black event. So Johnson came in with a whole bunch of other Black students. I was there, and he said, we're going to mob out. And he had his big Bluetooth speakers. So here you can see how an event for everyone became a Black event through the collective agency of Black students. So I'll just read this really quickly. When Johnson played the song Millie Rock, he left his post of DJ and did his own Millie Rock. The key is in the footwork, he once told me. For almost 30 seconds, the spotlight was on him as he expertly Millie rocked, whirling his arms and rotating his body with speed, precision, and an improvisation that had a hypnotic effect. For that moment, he was supremely confident. The students roared with like excitement. For that moment, he was in control of himself and in control of the community which he so cared about. The community I'm talking about there is the Black community, right? And I'm saying that it's precisely because of his heavy participation in the Black community in these Black places, Black groups like Nesby, that he at that moment was comfortable in a culture, the school culture, the dominant culture that otherwise hurt. So at the same institution, depending on the social world, he could feel both at home and alienated. So here I just want to emphasize the importance of Black places, Black residence halls, like Black organizations. These are these life-giving, joy-giving, sustaining groups that actually aid in persistence. And just yesterday, actually, was W.E.B. Du Bois's, the prolific sociologist, author, essayist. It was his birthday. So I want to include this quote too, connecting kind of Du Bois with Johnson. And Du Bois, in reflecting on his experience at Harvard, he went to Harvard after he went to Fisk. And he said, the Harvard of which most white students conceived, I knew little. Yet Du Bois was not clamoring to join white student life. Rather, Du Bois was, in his words, voluntarily and willingly outside its social life, explaining that he was encased in a completely colored world, self-sufficient and provincial, and ignoring just as far as possible the white world which conditioned it. Du Bois at Harvard in the end of the 19th century and Johnson at Westside University in the 21st century both experienced the bulk of their campus lives within the social worlds of Black communities. So again, I'm just trying to emphasize to you all the importance, and the centrality of Black communities, of Black places, of Black organizations for Black students in these predominantly white organizations. This is another quote, and again, I'm thinking about like at what cost, right? Some of you probably heard about stereotype threat. And I say that students are not all in the students that I studied, right? Black engineers, they often talked about stereotypes that they saw or they had to deal with themselves. And I say students are not always crushed by stereotype threat, a phenomenon describing the anxiety surrounding awareness of an academic stereotype that leads to a negative impact on achievement. Rather, as McGee and Martin, these two scholars, argue, students can use their awareness of stereotypes and the permanence of racism as a necessary response to achieve. On the other hand, the process of using hard work as a coping mechanism in response to racist, unfair structures can also lead to symptoms related to chronic stress. Why do I highlight this? I say that shouldering a burden of any sort, from lifting weights to being in the perennial spotlight in class, leads to stress. Stress can spur growth, it can make you stronger, but stress can also bend and break, right? So not all stress is good stress. Too much stress can lead to a lot of physiologically damaging impacts that are unique to Black people. So if we were in class, I would ask, or if we were in person, I would ask, how many of you all have heard of John Henry? And then some of you all might raise your hands. Maybe you haven't. Also, like, hype me up. I use the GIF in PowerPoint. Like, I'm not very good at PowerPoint, so I'm proud of myself. But this is John Henry, right? And to very, long story short, folktale, story short, John Henry, a Black man, in the folktale, was known as the steel driving man. In pictures, he's always this big, burly Black man, right, with a hammer. And he's challenging, or he was challenged by someone in like this steam engine to knock these spikes into the train tracks. I don't know the actual verbiage, right? But either way, you can see John Henry challenging the machine. There's no way that one person should be able to challenge a machine, whether that machine is a metaphor, right? Whether that machine is capitalism, whether that machine is classism, whether that machine is racism, or somewhere all between, just jumbled together. John Henry is going one-on-one against the machine, outworking the machine. And actually, he won. But at what cost? John Henry's heart burst and he died after defeating the machine, right? And so there's this whole idea of John Henryism, which is the high effort coping that a lot of Black folks have been postulated or hypothesized to experience. So similar to John Henryism, Black folk in many cases think that they can outwork racism, or I can work twice as hard, to overcome racism. But this has damaging physiological effects. The same thing comes from racial-based traumatic stress. Similarly, there's this other concept called racial battle fatigue, where just you being Black or being a person of color navigating these predominantly white spaces, you end up with almost like a post-traumatic stress, similar to the type of stress that folks who are in combat feel. You're exhausted, headaches, tired, and depression. So there are a lot of different physiological responses that one can have from just trying to navigate white spaces, right? Not even trying to achieve, right? But just trying to navigate white spaces. You can have some type of race-based trauma or stress. And this can manifest in depression, high blood pressure, chronic stress, and physiological distress. And at the end of the day, I just want to emphasize just navigating a lot of these spaces, especially when you're like the only one or one of few, like compared to the majority of folks racially, it's labor, it's work. And when you're working too hard, what happens? You get exhausted. So a few things with my remaining time, I actually want to highlight Black women in particular, and a couple quotes about Black women and their unique experiences. So here you can just look at the quotes yourselves, but NSBE, the National Society of Blacks and Engineers at this school, wouldn't have existed just by itself, right? The school didn't just have a NSBE like, all right, y'all, we want to set up NSBE. No, it was actually defunct for a very long time. And it took a Black woman, a student, and also an engineering student to go out of her way to set up this organization that's now flourishing and doing really well. But she was doing this on top of her homework, right? She was doing this on top of her social life. So think about the labor that goes into that, you know? And I'll just highlight this goal quote. And this is from Nakoshi, the student I used for the Black woman who set up NSBE. She said, there are less of us, but yet we have this expectation to be at every event. SWE, this is a society of women engineers, can do it because they have large numbers of members. I'm at everything because who else is going to do it, right? So here you have this Black woman in leadership setting this thing up for the greater good of her Black community, being taxed and pulled in every which way, and the institution being unresponsive. Next, I want to talk about group work. And I found this this like phenomena of a lot of black students in general, but really Black women in particular, who were doing group work, they were doing group work by themselves. So I was just shocked by it. So I was like, wait, this is meant for a whole group. Wait, how are you doing it by yourself? So here you can see my exchange with Jasmine, and this you can see my shock. And she says, yeah, last semester I did everything by myself, like labs by myself, group projects by myself. I did everything. So you can see me, I'm like, whoa, we did, that doesn't make sense. I said, I did everything by myself. Nobody wants to work with me. They don't want to work with that Black girl over there. Yeah. And so you all know, Jasmine killed it in her classes. It's not that she wasn't smart. She was outscoring most of her peers. Math and she was a math major and electrical engineering major. They just didn't want to work with her because she's a Black woman. And this is just the last, another quote I'll use just to demonstrate, at what cost, and this is another Black woman who was also in leadership within NSBE. She said, it's hard. Engineering isn't really designed to do by yourself. She explained. For example, there's some projects where it's like, oh, we could do it with one or two people. Most of the time, I do it by myself because one, it's easier to do it by myself than to find somebody. And she described her thought process to me being pretty sarcastic, but she was like, okay, let me talk to Becky over here who doesn't actually want to work with me. And, she kind of like, pretend like, and I have to kind of like pretend like I care to do this project with her when the professor said I don't have to do it with another person. So I just do it by myself. For Ayana, I found working by herself was a more attractive option than working with a non-Black classmate. Outside of projects, she also worked on problem sets for homework by herself. And then she explained to me, so you get 2 weeks to do 20 problems, right? Ayana began. Other groups will take that 20 problems, split it amongst themselves, and collect it. And she says, I will do all that by myself. So again, you can see just this labor, this tax, and the way it manifests, not only in navigating white spaces just socially, but also in work. There's extra work there. And what does this have to do? Again, I was talking specifically about Black women here, but other Black men mentioned it, but it was predominantly Black women. And this made me think of the strong Black women stereotype, which suggests that Black women are inherently strong, self-sacrificing caregivers, and independent. But at what cost, right? So Black college women, some research shows, often endorses this strong Black woman ideal as part of their identity. But adopting this ideal is also associated with negative mental health outcomes, such as stress and depression. And I'll leave you all with this. So what do we do, right? And I'm sure we'll talk more about this, as a group in Q&A, but I think we invest in Black students and invest in Black staff. I think Black people are already doing a lot of this work. So pay Black people more, just to do the same thing that other people are doing. Because we're also doing a lot of this race diversity work that institutions don't see, organizations don't see. Second, center Black joy. Prioritize your peace. Your diversity work is not owed. And lastly, find Black collectives and invest in Black places. So I will stop there. Thank you all so much. I really am excited to see, to chat with everyone else and hear other voices on the panel.
Wow. Wow, this is probably one of those events for me that it's tough to be a facilitator because I just want to jump in, right? Because everything you said resonated so much. I'm just going to say three things. Number one, I absolutely agree with the fact that if you put myself and a classmate of mine who was white identifying from where I went to undergraduate, you would we would have two different experiences in terms of what they experienced and what they went to, the events and what they visited in terms of the area. Whether it was me, yes, for sure, I was struggling to even find Black spaces. I had to really prioritize, when is that meeting being held? I need to contribute to that event. Number two is that when I think of my experience, I don't even think about the university environment. I'm thinking about the brothers that I'm still talking to today, the folks that I'm flying out to go to their engagement parties and that I'm still very connected to, right? And last but not least, I just want to say, my Millie Rock is pretty sturdy too. So, you can put me up against anybody, but I'm going to stop there. Thank you for that presentation, Dr. Tichavakunda. I have to let you know that working with my team on this event, the overwhelming feedback I got was that it was a hard read to put down. Your book is what I'm referring to. Now we get an opportunity to unpack that content with some open discussion, bringing in our student panelists, because it would never make sense to talk about the Black student experience without actually hearing from Black students themselves. I also want to mention that this virtual event was scheduled in a way that doesn't take up too much of everyone's evening, because if you're a student joining us, then I know there are probably 6 different assignments you could be working on right now. And if you're an educator joining, then we absolutely want to keep your night intact for some much needed rest and or family time, whichever applies to you. With that in mind, even if we may not be able to get through everything by 7 p.m., please feel free to throw any questions that come to mind for our panelists into the chat in case we have a few minutes at the end of the facilitated discussion for some live Q&A. But let's jump in on a question for really just open discussion between all of our panelists. Again, in reference to the use of terms like BIPOC or students of color, what impacts does this blanketed grouping have on recognizing the unique identities and struggles of Black students on college campuses? And specifically to our student panelists, how is that received by you when you hear that? And you know about what your experience like, and it can't be compared to anybody else, but yet there is this grouping and there is this blanketed view that you're seeing through.
I saw you on mute, India. You can go ahead.
All right, girl.
Go ahead.
So what I found at the University of Dayton, like I said, I introduced myself. My name is India Richardson. I am a junior at the University of Dayton and I major in nursing. And what I've noticed a lot on campus is that people do use that term, like people of color or you're a person of color. And I find it to be somewhat of like a generalization because I am a Black student of color and my experience as a Black student of color is going to be different than, the other people of color on campus. Like we do have people from India, we have Indians, we have Arabs, like we have other people. So I find it to be more of a generalization. And I'm not gonna lie, like it hurts sometimes. It doesn't necessarily hurt, but I think it comes from just like that lack of education. And so a lot of people just like kind of put like that whole blanket, like that blanketed term or that you said in the question, they just generalize it as a whole. Because my struggles as like I said, a Black woman is going to be different than their struggles. So that's what I found.
No, I definitely agree with you. I think for me, it's intention versus impact. I think the word BIPOC was created with good intent, but at the end of the day, its impact it's lacking. And for me, most importantly, it ignores like this country's very ugly history with racism. So we can't just have a blanketed term for people of color because our experience is different and the challenges that we face every single day on these campuses is something that's going to be unique to us. So I personally am not one to use it. I want us to like, if we're going to talk about an issue, let's talk about the issue directly. Let's not dance around the issue. Let's address it. And then let's actually work towards solutions for it.
And you also wonder, and what comes to mind for me is also the fact that, you know, a lot of institutions love to flaunt diversity, right? So you group everybody in one go, and you're able to say, this is how diverse we are. When no, if 90% of that diversity you're referring to is what, international students or you know, high achieving students, then you know you are still leaving out and erasing the experience of those who are truly struggling, while still putting out this message and image that you are doing well for yourself as an institution. So thank you for sharing. While understanding the importance of Black spaces and places for Black students to convene and foster a sense of belonging, what type of toll does that take on their overall higher education? Specifically referring to the fact that white students don't usually need to go out of their way to do the same, right? If we're talking about events where you're looking to be around those who look like you, I remember going to lectures of 600 students and being able to count on one hand how many of them look like me. So you're already mixing and mingling in a classroom where I have to find an event. I have to get out there to really find a community. So I'm wondering, what type of toll does that take on students in terms of having to balance, yes, the academic achievement, but then also feeling like you belong here, feeling like you're welcome here?
So in my experience, I went to the University of Florida, and very, very small population of Black people. I think we were 6% on the campus. But at the end of the day, we wanted to make our experience a positive one. So we created and sought out those experiences. We had a house that was super old, falling apart, but that's where we used to convene. And at the end of the day, we used to press the university to get us better resources to upgrade our house, because we needed funding to do that. And while that was being updated, we needed another space. I think in retrospect, I'm happy that we were able to advocate for these houses and for these places for us to commune and get together. But at the end of the day, I don't think the onus and responsibility should be on us to have to do that, because at the end of the day, that's emotionally taxing in and of itself, because you're telling me you don't see value in doing it on your own. Because at the end of the day, these buildings are inspected, you know what they look like. And if you found value in updating them, then they would be updated. We shouldn't have to, as student organizations, we created like a coalition of Black organizations just to advocate for these issues. And at the end of the day, we're proud of what we accomplished, but it takes a toll on students, on top of being a student, on top of being the minority in the classroom, on top of not seeing your peers. When you go into your chemistry classes, you just see the group of Black people, the 10 Black students in your class, or 10 is generous, all the way in the corner. And at the end of the day, it shouldn't have to be like that. It shouldn't have to be like we have to fight to be seen or to be heard, or even to find community. So I think universities have to put a bigger emphasis on putting their money where their mouth is. If you say you value diversity, put your money there as well.
I completely agree with Clara. UD is known to say that they promote diversity, and they try to put a Black student on the cover of a magazine that they're promoting for the month or whatever. But that is not reflected in the classroom. That's not reflected in the events that they hold. And that irritates me. I am a Black student leader on campus. I am the secretary for my Black student union, BATU, or Black Action Through Unity. And so when it comes to having Black students, feel comfortable in those spaces, that's why I became a Black student leader to begin with, because I did want to have a change on campus. And that's my job as secretary. I have to have those difficult conversations with the president of the university. Like, okay, why do we have so many Black students withdrawing from the school? Like, why is that? Like, I've had 5 friends who have withdrawn from UD in the past year. And yes, it can be because of COVID. It can be because of all the other unfortunate, circumstances that, caused them to do that. But then again, I feel like it's a systemic thing. It's all because of the institution itself. Where were those resources that they needed? For example, like our counseling center, there is no Black representation there. How are you going to promote this resource, but I can't even feel comfortable going to somebody and saying, talking about my Black issues? Like, how are you going to understand where I come from if you're not, Black? So like, kind of like that term, like, putting your money where your mouth is. UD does a horrible job at doing that. And UD has so much money, and I feel like they just don't know how to, they prioritize certain things that necessarily don't need to be prioritized. And Black student health is not one. And then just when it comes to being the only I'm the only Black student I'm the only Black woman in my nursing program, period. So difficult conversations do arise. Like when it comes to just like certain like health processes and disease processes that we go through, I'm always somehow the example that gets put on stage from like professors and my instructors, like, hey, India, can you explain your experience from this? Or like, what have you seen at clinical? And yes, I don't mind educating people, but why am I always that person? So it's kind of like that Black woman stereotype, like, you kind of just have to eat it with dust and, fight it, but it definitely gets irritating at times.
Yeah, and I could definitely say that I vividly remember literally having to choose between knocking out assignments and feeling some type of joy from the college experience, right? Because you think about lack of, diversity, you think about the fact that when you have a small population of Black students, you're probably not going to connect with or even see or even interact with those who are in your program. So what does studying look like? If I'm in pre-med, who am I studying with if I can't find anybody in my classrooms? What am I gonna go study with an art student who, we're not gonna be studying together, we're still separate in that instance. Whereas when you are the majority, your study groups come like this. You find them in the classrooms and then you are able to succeed together in general. So if vividly remember having to make that decision, and oftentimes for some reason that studying never feels good. Studying and getting that great grade is still kind of like, but I missed out on being with my people, unfortunately. So Dr. Tichavakunda, feel free to jump in on this question because I feel like it does touch on being a professor, right? And being in the classroom and trying to combat this issue. So on the other side of fostering a sense of belonging with spaces and places for Black students, there is also this issue of hypervisibility. And I believe you touched on it as well, India. Being a part of a handful of Black students in predominantly white classrooms and programs where the few may be put in unfair positions of representing the whole, sometimes referred to as representation burnout. What is the mental, emotional effect, specifically referring to our students? But then, Dr. Tichavakunda, how do you combat that as an instructor, right?
That's such a good question, and it's one of those things where, like, I will talk the rest of this time period if you don't stop me. You're like, I'll stop you, but yeah, I'm not. I mean, I always try to explain, like, typically when I'm doing like a presentation, I talk about how different I was from a lot of the students that I taught when I was a teacher, right, in DC, just to show the heterogeneity within Blackness, right. And if you think about critical race thought in general, one of the big things is that, like, these groups are not monoliths, right? They're we are not a monolith. Black people are not a monolith. There's so much diversity, intergroup diversity within Blackness, right? And I think on a personal level, like, I obviously try to show that or emphasize it if I feel like someone is I don't know, just kind of implicitly stating that I should be acting some type of way, or surprised that I'm not doing this, that, and the third. But I also, I think similar to what Du Bois was saying at Harvard, right? Like, most of my friend, the majority of my friend group at Brown when I was in college was predominantly Black. People would look back on my Facebook during the time. They're like, "Yo, is Brown at HBCU?" Because I was only in pictures with Black people. Because I'm not thirsty for nobody. Like, if people are being mean, I'm just not like, all right, like, I'm good. And so I in the same way, like Du Bois was talking about it, I tend to gravitate to Black people. So I don't have to deal with a lot of these things. And obviously we're very diverse, but I'm not gonna have to deal with some of those microaggressions that I might deal with non-Black people, right? So obviously I do have non-Black friends, but even now, right? Like, one of the benefits of not having to go to work all the time is that I can be very selective with who I hang out with. So I'll just I'll stop there.
So what about you, Clara? I know India touched on this in the previous question, but that medical world is a different game as well.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. I guess there's like a lot of different lenses. I think for me, one of the most important things, I think like Dr. Antar said, he chooses to be around Black people. And during my undergraduate education, yeah, that was my experience because I didn't have time or energy to be surrounded by people who are willfully ignorant. I remember being in my undergraduate class where people would say things like, racism doesn't exist anymore. And of course, this was a long time ago. They were like, because we have a Black president. And you as a Black student, you're sitting, and it was in a sociology class, you as a Black student, knowing your experience, you're over here like, I beg, I beg your pardon. Like, what are you even saying? So it was definitely just, I don't know, it's just black and white, the experiences. And that was not fun, but like coming to medical school, I chose to come to a school where there were more Black people. And when I say more Black people, the class before me had about like 28 Black students. And that was important to me because when you look at other medical schools, you see classes with 120 students, you see 6 Black people. So you have no option but to befriend all 6, you know what I'm saying? Because if you want to have like somebody with a common or shared experience, you're gonna have to befriend those people. I think now that I'm in this education, I'm trying to like, you know, become more accustomed to like branching out and not just staying around my Black folks, even though that's where I'm comfortable and that's where I find rest and that's where it's easy. I do understand that I have to navigate a lot of spaces where it won't just be us. And it can be emotionally taxing. And oftentimes like where I find rest is sometimes not doing just the diversity work. Sometimes I have to take a step back because I did so much of it during undergrad. I told myself I could not burn out like that again coming to medical school because the curriculum is intense. And sometimes you have to take a step back from what you're doing in order to just be able to get through because the work is taxing and it'll always be there. So you just pick it up where you have energy and when you can.
Absolutely. And you talk about I think you mentioned black and white or just the night and day experiences, right? Where literally being in classrooms, I would get excited for the afternoon. I know I'm about to hit up a student club. I know we got some Friday night meeting coming up, and it did feel miserable. And I'm thinking about it now, and you know, you put on, especially I think even as Black men, you put on this macho frame, like, you know what, I'm just gonna sit in the back of the class, when in all reality, I already know a lot of my classmates want nothing to do with me. So therefore, I'm going to, you know, kind of get through this class so I can go be with the people that will welcome me, essentially. So it is a very miserable experience. And you have, if you ask 2 different people about me, folks in those clubs versus folks in my classes, and you say, what type of person was Fabrice like? You're going to get 2 completely different answers, because I had to make a decision of, do I assimilate or do I protect my peace? Because I already know trying to jump into that pool you know, is a lot hotter than it seems, or it might cause me even more pain on the back end where I'm losing myself in the process. So thank you for sharing, both of you. Now this is the big one, right? A study published in the Journal of Medical Research and Innovation in 2020 explored the diminished health returns from chronic disease to mental illness of educational attainment for Black and African Americans, and found that highly educated non-Hispanic Black Americans remain at a high risk for poor health across domains, a risk which is unexpected given their education. If you're more educated and you're getting higher paying jobs, why shouldn't your health outcomes also be better? How does that's not the case, essentially. How does this finding resonate with the panelists on this webinar, all navigating very demanding fields, education, medicine, nursing? Is this new and confusing information, or is this an unsurprising truth based on your personal experience and or interactions with other Black students or professionals?
It personally does not surprise me because I recently just did a event over this. It does surprise me. Does it surprise me that Black people of color are more likely to, you know, have certain health and disease processes? No, that does not surprise me at all. in which we found out that it's due to systemic racism. But does it surprise me that that highly educated Black people are, more at risk for, these health and disease processes? Yes, that surprises me a lot. Yeah, I can jump back in, but yeah.
I'll just add something real quick. Oh, my bad. You brought it.
No, go ahead. All right. So I will say, I think it kind of does surprise me, because I think when you're young, you're sold a dream as if education is the key that will provide you with a better life. And I think you go into chasing these degrees and higher education because that's what they told you would provide you with a better life. And I remember the moment, going through college, I remember putting my own health issues to the backseat just to make sure, I was passing those classes. I had to work during college. So I understand, I saw myself putting my health in the back seat, and I was chasing medicine. So it was like, what's actually going on here? And I remember, I think this is when, this was in 2020, I think the moment where it really hit was when I saw that attending physician. I looked up her name, it was Dr. Shanice Wallace. And she finished medical school residency and was an attending. And she died during childbirth. And I think it was very sobering for me, because at the end of the day, like, you kind of expect better for yourself when you're like, okay, I'm going to be able to advocate for myself because I know these things. And then watching a Black woman die, for something as simple as childbirth, and she was a physician, I'm like, you kind of see yourself in that situation. So you're like, it's just very difficult. And it's one of those realizations that you have, like, no matter how much education you have, no matter how much you think you can advocate for yourselves, you can become a victim to the system. And it's just it's a very difficult pill to swallow. But yeah, I don't have enough words for that, but that's part of the thought.
Yeah, and just what comes to mind for me is, once again, this sentiment, especially here in the United States, that you pick yourselves up by your bootstraps, right? And things are going to be figured out. You work hard, you land of opportunity, and you're going to make it. And as I dove deeper into it, and I witnessed, I recognized the data showing that, especially when you look at Black women, you have this intersectional identity, right? The higher the educational attainment, the worse the health outcomes, right? So you can look at from a bachelor to a master's to a doctorate. You're going up in education attainment, maybe even salary, maybe even in just, I guess, economic privilege. But you are going down in terms of what that quality of life looks like for you. And that doesn't compute to me. The data is showing that to me, but it's not making sense in terms of why that is and how hard it is to achieve and to, build out a healthy environment around you. So you have to pick and choose. Do I want to, you have to pick and choose, I guess. Do I want to pursue this achievement, or do I want to save myself that stress that is going to impact me down the line or sooner than I think? And that's a difficult one as well. So thank you for sharing, for sure. I think Dr. Tichavakunda, you mentioned this already in your presentation, but I want to ask one more time, in short words, where do we go from here, and what steps do you think higher education institutions need to pursue outside of what you already mentioned? What's kind of that I guess pivotal point or pivotal move that we need to make? Because you would assume that with I think, in the past decade, we're seeing so many more chief diversity officers. We're seeing so many more VPs of equity and inclusion. So why is the impact, or why is the improvement not being seen? So what do you think? Where do we go from here, essentially?
I think it depends, right? The typical answer. I'll start with a quote from a very short part of a quote from Frederick Douglass in short. And Frederick Douglass says, "Power concedes nothing without demand. It never has, and it never will." We've seen a lot of student groups put out these demands, right? But there's no teeth behind these demands. So we need teeth. What can we do to force these universities, force these institutions, businesses, organizations, however, to really change. It's not going to be out of goodwill, and I think that's part of it. Part of the thing that we need to get real about these things. Universities will not care about Black students until we make them care. I don't even know if universities are capable of it, right? You ask me, I think universities are more like hedge funds than things for public good, right? So we have to make it so it's in their best interest to help Black people, right? Because appealing to morality isn't going to work. It hasn't worked for years, right? You have to hit pockets. You have to disrupt. You have to exit, move with your feet, right? If all Black people left PWIs and started going to HBCUs, I guarantee you PWIs would start changing up, And so that's one thing. How can we change? We to get real about organizations and their willingness. We can't assume that they actually care, have an ethics, So we have to get real about that. And second, I would say we have to realize that at the end of the day, for better or worse, we are all we have. We as in Black people, right, and allies. Because that's, I don't know, like everything we get done, as we've heard, as I talked about in my book, as you all have shared, it's been done through collective agency. So really think about what ways we can tap into Black organizations, other Black people who are organizing in different capacities. How can we continue to lift each other up? And I think that's what we do in the meantime.
Thank you. And I just have one more question on a lighter note, because we gotta also add the some love in this whole conversation. But I do want to tend to one question in the chat. As you talk about the role of fatigue in Black student experiences in K through 12 schools, please speak to some of the most pressing resources needed to support first-year Black students at historically white institutions. I'm picking up this question because the response is easy. Everything, everything from the academic support in terms of tutoring, or from the economic disadvantage, and making sure education is actually accessible. And I remember my father telling me that there was no Wi-Fi connection at their place for my little brothers to use, because he was trying to help me get through school. So the economic support as well, mental health services as well. So there isn't just a little package that we can put together to say, okay, this is enough. It is the full spectrum when you look at the social determinants of wealth, built environment in that social and community context, right? What are they walking into, and are they having to go out of their way to feel like they belong, or is it embedded somewhere in the staff and faculty that are working there and whatnot? So I'm going to stop there because I want to ask one more question. If y'all don't mind me taking potentially a minute or two more of y'all time. So on a lighter note, as I mentioned, the theme of Black History Month 2022 is Black Health and Wellness. I wanted to ask the panel, how do you prioritize those things in your day-to-day? Or have you been doing something new this month to invest in yourself?
So I have been trying to eat more fruits recently, and I also have been trying to journal a little bit more. I've found that like just writing, just like my thoughts day to day help me. And then I saw this thing on TikTok actually, where there was a jar where she just basically she put like, I don't know, like 100 different things that she wanted to get done in the year. And she drew one like every week, and that's what she did. So I'm planning on doing that actually.
Wonderful.
Well, my boards are next week, so there hasn't been a lot of self-care recently, but I'm trying to get back in the gym consistently, and then make sure I eat all 3 meals. It seems simple, but that's what I'm trying to prioritize. And I wanted to touch on your last question. I think having a space for Black students is important. Just like having a space for them to like even eat luncheon, or just stop by to have a daily dose of maybe even seeing someone that looks like them in that day. Sorry for derailing the conversation, but I thought,
oh, you're fine.
At the very bare minimum, somewhere to fill their cup and see people that look like them is super important, and it's just a place to start. So yeah, that's all.
Okay, Antar, Nesby Dad, what you've been doing in 2022 to invest in yourself?
I'll be very quick. I was going to a therapist, and just kind of ran its course. I'm looking for a new therapist. I'm big on therapy. I think we all should, if possible, have a therapist, right? If your insurance allows it. So therapy, A lot of anime. I really don't watch the news very often because I'll hear about it later, but I love me some anime, and I do not feel like I need to watch the news because it's just easy to get sucked into that. So
Please
I
don't.
try to
Not right
be,
now. Don't watch the news.
yeah, I'm not. So I try to be very careful about what media I consume, and that's been very helpful for me.
Wonderful. Hey, listen, we could definitely go on for 2 hours, y'all. I'm not even joking, but that is our time. And I know we could probably go on for, the entire night. But thank you, Dr. Tichavakunda, for offering your expertise on this topic. And a big thank you to our student panelists who are probably jumping right into some schoolwork after this, for making yourselves available. I'm happy to announce that Dr. Tichavakunda will be sending over a copy of his book to you both. And I'll see if I can talk to him on the side to throw in a signature in there or not. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how cool he is, right? I also want to thank the folks that you did not see on your screen tonight. Minority Health Specialist Malia Carrington, who was sliding through our PowerPoint and looking over the chat, as well as our resident IT and public information expert, Dawson Powell. And last but not least, I want to thank all of you who tuned in for this opportunity. I certainly hope you got something significant out of it, like I definitely did. And it is still Black History Month. So hold on, let me share my screen real quick. You know what I mean? Let me just throw this up there. We are still supporting Black businesses. We are still supporting Black initiatives, and we're supporting Black authors and educators. Hop on to SUNY Press to get your copy, please. If you like what you heard in this presentation or in this virtual engagement, you're gonna love that book. So thank you all again. Enjoy your night, and let's keep the movement going. Let's keep having these discussions and really highlighting and prioritizing the Black experience, and at least take steps forward, and at least making that more visible in how we approach advancing and progressing as a community. So thank you again. Enjoy your evening, and stay Black.